Yep. Okay. Thank you so much. And look, welcome back to this panel presentation. This panel focuses on experiences of library social work and social work placements in libraries. And again, thank you for joining us. We have 4 panelists today. We have, as you can see on the screen, we have Anne-Marie Farb, we have Chrissy Bolton, Erin McKeegan and Sabine Wardle. And in a little minute, I'll let them introduce themselves in a little bit more detail and give a little bit of context about their connection to social work in libraries. And I know from this morning's presentations, there's much food for thought that I'm sure is all buzzing around our heads, and perhaps some of those threads can be drawn into our panel discussion today as well. So before we hear from the panelists, just in terms of the format for this panel presentation, I will aim to or sort of cover 4 areas, I suppose. They're not specific questions as such, but we're really keen to explore each panelist's experience, that broad nature of the experience of social work in libraries, and whether that's social workers in practice in libraries or whether that's social work student placements in libraries. So the broad nature of that experience, again, in terms of the context of their connection with social work in libraries, and then hopefully to look at some of the tasks, so to get to that concrete level about what it actually looks like and the concrete action level of social work in libraries in the panelists' experience, and to, I guess, engage in some critical considerations too, so strengths as well as limitations and challenges, etc., of social work in libraries, and hopefully generate some suggestions and ideas as well. So the way that we'll cover those 4 sorts of aspects, I'll ask each panel, or I'll ask at the start about experiences. And as I said, each panelist in turn can introduce themselves and then describe their connection to social work in libraries and the nature of that connection and the broad experience of that for a few minutes each. And then we'll sort of move through to focus on those other 3 areas around tasks, strengths and limitations, and suggestions and ideas for future practice. For participants, if you have questions that you would like to ask of the panelists, we will allow time toward the end of this session for questions. So as with this morning's or earlier presentations, please just pop any questions that you would like to be tabled. Please place those in the Q&A box. Okay, so I think we should get going. And if I could start with Anne-Marie, your name is at the top of the list. So if I could ask you to come off mute, and if you could start by giving us just a brief overview of yourself and your connection to social work in libraries, and again, just that broad context about your particular perspective about social work in libraries, that'd be fabulous.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you very much for you and for the organising committee for inviting me to be part of this panel and symposium. It's been great so far, and it's a fantastic opportunity for us to talk about what we're doing at City of Melbourne. I would like to acknowledge first the traditional owners of the land from where I am speaking to you today, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Eastern Kulin, and I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. So I'm the manager of the City of Melbourne Libraries, which currently is a network of 6 static branches. And I say currently because we also have 4 pop-up libraries. So the city has been lucky enough to gain some funding from the state government to extend its network temporarily. So we have these wonderful pop-up libraries throughout the CBD. So our experience of having a social worker in the library has been a wonderful, positive experience. So the City of Melbourne has employed a qualified social worker as part of the library team since 2019. Karen, just stop me if I'm going on too much. So I realise there's not much time for everybody to speak.
No, thank you.
We came to the decision to employ a social worker after significant research and consultation. And we really looked at the data we analysed a lot of data in terms of an incident response procedure that we had. So we were recording incidences in the libraries, and so having that, we were lucky enough to have that information to analyse. So after doing that research and consultation with our staff and with others, we went down the road of getting a social worker. So prior to 2019, library management received an increasing number of requests from staff to provide extra support in responding to people with complex needs and to ensure workplace safety. So those two issues were in play. We engaged in a suite of responses that included an incident response manual and serious incident de-escalation training. But the catalyst for us, or the intervention for us, if you like, was a couple of us went to a session run by the State Library of Victoria, in which Leah Esguerra from San Francisco and Sarah Zetaval, who is the author of Whole Person Librarianship, spoke. So it was there that we understood that that's what we needed. So we knew that we had an issue, we were analysing the issue, and we understood that what we needed was a library social worker. And we investigated that. Actually, Leanne Mitchell, who's a speaker later on this afternoon, was very instrumental in honing in our ideas and helping us understand what we really needed and helping us research and present a business case. I've got a bit more to say, but I'll leave it open for other people to speak.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So it sounds like you collected some data, you made a case, and then we're at the point now where you've engaged in a few strategies to connect with a social worker. Yes, okay. I'll ask Chrissy next. Could you please just briefly introduce yourself and also then just give us the context and your connection to social work in libraries? Thanks, Chrissy. You're just on mute, Chrissy.
Hi everyone, I'm
Thanks.
Chrissy Bolton. It says I'm the acting manager, but I've since been appointed as the substantive manager of the library, so I'm very pleased about that.
Oh, congratulations.
But I just wanted to acknowledge also my former colleague, Claire Campbell, who was the manager previously, and she did a lot of work in this space. We started working at Wagga City Library with different types of professions quite a number of years ago. So one of the things we did around 2009 from memory was work with a HAC worker who is the home and community care nurse while we established our library service to people who were homebound. So that worker basically had a welfare type check arrangement where we would deliver books and our volunteers would have a conversation and we would work out whether or not there were any ways that we might be able, the HAC team would be able to assist those people. So it was just another way of taking care and checking up on the community. So that was a project that we undertook. And then we had a project around new migrants and refugees in the city. We're a welcome refugee city. And so we do have a lot of 98 different language groups from last count within the city. And many of them don't actually qualify for the TAFE English courses that you can do. So we realised that there was a lot of disconnection and people not being able to connect with the community. So we decided to establish Language Cafe, actually, and Monique Shepherd was actually a part of that process. And that was, we actually had conversations with TAFE, with other providers in the city who were helping with refugees and migrants, such as the Multicultural Council and Red Cross. And again, we established this space. So jumping forward, Sabine got in contact with Claire and we decided that we would have some social work students. And I'm happy to talk about that further, but essentially I think we have been active in the space without actually naming it that until we had the students with us.
Fabulous. Okay, thank you. So that really maps out that context and your connections really well. And sounds like it's been, well, it has been a long process actually. And as you said, it's built and developed over the years according to different needs along the way. Yeah, thanks,
Correct.
Chrissy. And Erin, if I can ask you, please, to introduce yourself and then your connection to social work in libraries.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you for today as well. It's been, very interesting, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed listening to all the presentations and questions. I'm Erin. I'm the library social worker with City of Melbourne. I'm the second library social worker in this role. My predecessor, Anna Lockwood, is actually going to be presenting after this panel discussion. So I feel very grateful that I was the second one in the role, because Anna sort of put in a lot of the frameworks and processes which made my transition into the role a lot easier. But I felt very welcomed when I started. I've been in the role about 18 months. So prior to that, most of my social work career has been in the Northern Territory in Central Australia, and working with Aboriginal, mostly Aboriginal clients in urban and remote communities, as well as hospital settings in Victoria, and forensic mental health. And I've just supervised, one is still finishing their placement, but we've had 2 social workers this year undertake their social work placements with City of Melbourne, and also partnered up with Yarra Libraries and Marybeck as well.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, that's great. You've got a real breadth of experience in social work, and you know, I'm sure you're bringing so many multi-layered skills to social work in libraries. And as you said, being the second social worker, coming into a mapped out context and now supervising students. That's fantastic. Thank you, Erin. And Sabine, if I could move on to you to introduce yourself and explain your connection to social work in libraries broadly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen, and hello, everyone. I'm Sabine Wardle. I am Senior Lecturer in Social Work at Charles Sturt University, and I'm speaking from the Wiradjuri land, so I pay my respect to all First Nations people, past and present, and anyone attending this meeting. Thank you. My role I would go with the field education supervisor, as well as the person in collaboration with Karen Bell and in consultation with Wagga Wagga City Library to initiate this program at the regional public libraries. So while we see many examples of social work placements being introduced in metropolitan areas in the libraries, but Charles Sturt University has been the first one to introduce in a regional public library. And in my role has been the field education direct supervision for the student, but also planning and customizing the plan to suit the needs of the libraries, as well as making sure that we meet the Australian Association of Social Workers practice standards, as well as field education standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine. So I have a little bit of insider knowledge in working with Sabine around the social work student placements in the Wagga Wagga City Library. And yeah, that's been a really interesting process. And maybe if I could stay with you, Sabine, just for a minute, just to move on to the next sort of focus area around some specific tasks that have been built into, there's been 2 social work placements locally that we've both had some input into, but if you could explain some of the more concrete tasks that those 2 students have worked on as part of their placement.
Yeah, it's been a process like any other project that, you know, Anne-Marie has mentioned. A lot of research and consultations gone into it. We consulted and got advice from our colleagues from School of Information and Communication Studies, Jane Garner, who is also the host of this event today, and Monique Shepherd, and also other colleagues like Casey Garrison that we consulted with. And the more important part of this consultation was the consulting with the local library and getting to know the needs in the local community. And And a lot of time has gone into planning and processing before we introduced a social work student. And the first social work student was introduced in September 2021 and successfully completed the placement in December 2021. And because of this success, we continued the program, and we still are going to continue that program and keep the momentum going. In terms of the task, task has been customized for every placement. We've had 2 successful placements so far. So for each placement, we customize the plan in extensive consultation with the library staff and knowing the library's needs and the community's needs. So the task varies from the research projects, getting to know the needs of the library staff, supporting library staff and supporting the library patrons in their psychosocial needs, providing referral services, providing network between the community and the services by running resource fairs. We called it mini resource fair. It was a weekly program that our social work student facilitated in collaboration with the library staff and the language cafe, where we invited the external agencies to come and provide information sessions to the communities on a weekly basis. Other than that, supporting people and communities from culturally, linguistically diverse backgrounds, and we are on an ongoing basis, we are planning to introduce social work students to outreach services also.
Thanks. So that's a great description of some of those really concrete things that social work students can do, and also social workers, of course. Erin, if I could move on to you for some examples from your own practice around, and perhaps your student placements as well, around specific tasks for social workers in libraries in that context. Thanks.
I guess part of the role is providing support to our library patrons, or some will use the word client. The other part is providing support to staff. So we do offer monthly peer-to-peer supervision for library staff. Since the students have been on placement, they've been facilitating or co-facilitating those sessions, which has been very helpful. So some of the topics might be around boundary setting. It might be how to respond to people who are experiencing dual diagnosis, mental health and substance use when attending the library, and also providing a space for library staff to reflect on previous incidents as well, and what might be helpful if something similar was to occur in the future. And then the other part of the role is networking within the community, like with stakeholders. So because I've only been back in Melbourne for about 18 months, just building up networks and relationships with the key stakeholders, with support services, attending weekly meetings where I can refer clients or library patrons who might be more at risk or experiencing those multiple and complex needs, and we can refer to that service where we can get a coordinated approach and try and support that person as best we can to work on their goals. Would you like me to keep going?
Yeah, look, I was just going to say that it's, from what you've just said, it sounds like there's those micro level sort of practice engagements where you're working directly with library users, clients, patrons, as well as that middle level, the mezzo level of staff supervision sessions and sounds like professional development sessions and that sort of thing at the library level. So
yeah, and a lot of it can be informal support as well. So sometimes staff will approach me and just have one-to-one sessions as well, or because I'm usually based at the City Library, but I do try and get out to the other library branches as well, depending on need. But because most of the services are sort of located in the city, it does make it a little bit easier. And I do have a space at the City Library where I can meet with people as well. And like what I've just gone with one of the
was it Patrick?
Patrick, that I do prefer the face-to-face. During COVID and lockdowns, it was a little bit tricky doing that via phone. But and for some people who are I guess older or have access difficulties, it is phone-based, but I've usually met them in person first. So the rapport building has been established, and that makes it easier to continue.
Okay,
Karen,
thanks.
I was just going to say that, sorry to jump in,
Go ahead.
Erin's given our staff, in terms of that mezzo level, vocabulary to use with when speaking about and in the context of the people who come into our service that are vulnerable. So we might have been using a vocabulary that's that wasn't appropriate in the past, and that's been enormously important. And I know that as librarians we love language, and getting that language right has helped us frame the situations or incidences or interactions in a different way, which has been enormously helpful and powerful.
Okay, would you be happy to provide an example or two?
Well, Erin just used one as dual diagnosis.
Yeah, okay,
and Erin probably can give some further examples, but I think we've had some discussions around when we report things, how we report them. If somebody's making a judgment about people, if somebody's looks like they're having a psychotic break, we know to say. We may not say it's a psychotic break as we're making an assumption, but we may use language that sort of describes the behavior. In the past, the language that we were using might have been a bit judgmental, and then that sort of sets up a sort of situation between the librarian or the library worker and the client or the patron as well. Would you say that's right, Erin? That sometimes
and even talking about these psychosocial needs, it does break down some of the stigma and those barriers, and it, I guess it helps staff to engage differently with our patron group as well.
And it's really powerful, isn't it? Just the power that change in language has culturally in an organisation. I think that just can't be underestimated, and it sounds like some really important work's been done there. Yeah. And Chrissy, do you have any examples or types of tasks that you would add in as well? Sorry, you're on mute.
I can tell you the types of things that the students did when they were visiting with us in their placements. And as I understand it, they were indirect placements, and that allowed them to have an off-site supervisor, which Sabine kindly did for us, which was terrific. But we also have upstairs in our social area an employee who has a master's of social work. So she was also very helpful, particularly with our first student in help. She used to go upstairs once a week and do some work with our social planning team. But in the library, practically they would be on the desk, so they would have face-to-face conversations with customers and get a feeling for what it's like to be and work in a library. Our first student undertook a complete survey of all of the different types of services that may be helpful for staff in a crisis. So essentially built a database so that then when she finished, we still had that living document that we can refer to, and staff do refer to it. So it's that in itself is of value. Obviously, an issue there is that we have to keep it current. And so a lot of that information was then fed into our community database. which is a database that's kept for the whole city, and that has an automated, you know, direction to update your details. So hopefully that will take care of itself in a sense. And she was dealing just with very general types of, that was her project. The second student, we placed them inside, as Sabine mentioned, Language Cafe. So it was a very specific cohort of people that student was assisting. So he ran the mini fairs, which were terrific, but he also ran half-hour sessions with our patrons to refer them or help them with some difficulties that they may be having. And again, they came from our multicultural community. So that was a very specific group of people that he was dealing with. Yeah, but it's been terrific. And Sabine and I are actually going to meet and have a conversation about what type of projects we can continue with. I'd recommend it to any library people who are watching. It's a wonderful opportunity to, as Anne-Marie said, learn the right kinds of language and, you know, just build a different kind of idea. I mean, I think we share a lot of the values anyway, libraries and social work. There's a lot of common ground. But yes, I mean, it would be lovely to be able to afford a social worker in the library at some point.
Fantastic. And maybe if we sort of shift the discussion a little bit to some of the, I guess, the more critical aspects of strengths and limitations of the role. And I think, well, many of the presenters this morning touched on, you know, some of the different, I guess, models and approaches that have different boundaries between the two discipline areas. And blurriness maybe between roles, and that can be a good thing, or it can be really challenging as well. So does anyone have any comments around some of those strengths and limitations around social work in libraries as well?
No, I just think it's for us, because we're a couple of years down the track, the strengths are, we don't need to sort of have that discussion with our funders in the city anymore. Yeah. It's just proved itself very valuable, and we did a lot of the work at the. I can't sort of stress that enough, that we did that research, that business case, that argument early in the piece, talking about the global context. It was enormously helpful having the American context to talk about why we needed social workers, the social worker in the library. And then we were able to go back and report on that and talk about how it has helped. And now it's not at all questioned. I mean, in the beginning, we did have some people, say counsellors might have used that argument about, well, librarians are not social workers. And I think one of the speakers said this earlier, I've forgotten if it was the first presentation or if it was Beth, that it's the library as a multidisciplinary, or maybe it was Patrick, a multidisciplinary place. It doesn't matter who's in it. We're all together providing a service to the community, and I think that's the strength. We have the shared values, and in terms of the difficulties, I think they can be worked through. I mean, really at this point, I think hopefully Erin agrees. I mean, the issue about her support and that role support has been one that we've needed to get to, you know, with Anna, starting with Anna and now with Erin, about getting their support right. I don't think it's been difficult. It's just that we've had to have our awareness raised about that. So clinical supervision, a community of practice, so that the social workers don't feel alone in their, you know, we're a bunch of librarians, a bunch of library workers. They fit in really well with the team, but so that their professional practice is supported is really important as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Erin, did you want to build on?
I was just going to add that the two disciplines do complement each other. Libraries are one of the few places that are free, accessible and safe And a lot of patrons or clients do mention that it's always been a place of solace when they've been in hard times or difficult times, and places where they can remain anonymous as well, particularly for clients who have been, I guess, seen so many services over the years and over their life time, that libraries are where they can have some peace, I guess, and not be seen as the person who is homeless or the person who has a mental illness, that they're just valued as a human being with dignity. And I am very grateful that I'm able to access external supervision. So that's on a monthly basis. We have the peer-to-peer supervision for staff, community of practice, which will reignite that, and also networking with other social workers within the council has been beneficial as well. So in the family services and community and aged care teams, even networking with social workers in other councils, particularly trying to I guess find subject matter experts. I've been working with a client who is experiencing hoarding and squalor, and there's an expert in other councils, so being able to case consult with her and get some advice around how to best support particular clients. So the networking and the relationship building with stakeholders, staff and patrons is key to social work practice.
Okay, so again, those strengths around, I guess, the bread and butter in some ways of social work practice around networking, and how that fits so well with not only the social justice focus of libraries as community hubs and as safe places and of library science, but also the information science side of it too. I think that's what really struck me out of some of the presentations this morning. That was a bit of a light bulb moment for me around information, and in social work we often talk about information overload and access and digital literacy, but actually Sabine and I had a corridor conversation about this in a break, and just saying it's often not taken to the next level. And I think that's where, between libraries and social work, there could be so much really exciting engagement there, I think. But no, thank you for that. Sabine or Chrissy, anything you wanted to build on in terms of strengths and limitations? Or maybe I'll go to Sabine first and then to Chrissy, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. In terms of strengths, I think we've heard from this morning, and we read a lot of literature. There are really strong points and the values that align in between those two professions. I'm going to talk about from social work student placement perspective. When we see these placements work out, then we really see the strengths and the benefits, and that adds to those strength stream. But there's a lot of work that goes behind the scene, a lot of planning, and that's where I think we need to take some small steps. And the effort that we went to in terms of consultation and introducing a social work student, we were quite careful, and we were carefully planning about it and carefully choosing the right kind of fit, the student who is willing and is keen to learn in a different kind of environment, which is usually considered a non-traditional kind of social work role. And there is a common perceptions about the role of social workers, and maybe not clear understanding about the role of social worker and the role of social work in libraries. And I mean, I have heard many times, even from social work academics, that, okay, what are social workers doing in the library? So that's where, that's a limitation that we have a long way to go in terms of raising awareness about, and also looking at it from an innovative lens, and more creative, and expanding the horizons for social work and social work students. And while we are waiting for that funding to happen, we have heard many stories or comments, read many comments that where it is not possible to have a social worker or there's not enough funding. So introducing social work students in the meantime could be, and also collecting evidence-based information and recording it, publishing about it, can actually make things easier for the times to come, where we can argue about the benefit of having a social worker in the libraries. But also, in terms of another challenge that I believed or I experienced or I thought of or reflected on is the blurred boundaries that, many times we hear from library staff also, that if we are to learn more about crisis intervention or about trauma-informed practice, then we would have gone for social work degree and not for library qualification. So that's where the boundaries, we want to make sure that it is interdisciplinary, working together towards the same goals and not having two separate identities which can potentially conflict. So that's where I'm really mindful of making these boundaries really clear, but also making sure that we work together as sister professions. That's mentioned in the literature, that towards the same goal of social justice.
Thank you so much. That was a great coverage of some of those, I guess, challenges too, and the importance of preparation work for social work students in particular, or for social workers moving into a newly established role. That's we don't often get to do slow preparation, but I guess careful preparation for those non-traditional sorts of roles. And yeah, just how important that is. It's a great point. Thank you, Sabine. Chrissy, is there anything you wanted to add in terms of those strengths and limitations and challenges, I guess, around social work and libraries?
Yeah, I think it's really important that, as Sabine said, you select the right student, because it is they are here as a single social work student amongst a group of librarians. Particularly with our first student, a lot of our team were a bit unsure of exactly how to support the placement, but it's 500 hours, so you do get some time to develop the relationship, obviously, and to also bring staff along with you. I think our first student was such a terrific pick, because she was just fantastic, a great communicator, and really took the time to explain. Her project was also to essentially talk about the history of social work in public libraries, going right back to the 1800s. And so that was presented to our staff, and then they had a context for the next student, which was terrific. Yeah, I would say you do have to have a student who's pretty brave, is self-directing, and has a clear sense of purpose within themselves. Otherwise, I can see that some students may not be suitable for it. That would be my observations. But we've had two terrific students, so it's been fine.
Lovely. So some more recipes for success there, as well as some challenges. But again, that those elements of preparation around student selection in particular, as you're saying, and again, especially moving into that sort of non-traditional context, and it's possibly not what your average social work student might be imagining their placement might look like. And we do have a lot of non-traditional or innovative sorts of placements as well. But yeah, the importance again of that preparation orientation. I know, again, with a bit of insider information, Sabine, myself and others worked on, an orientation package and project descriptions to really, we were hoping to give the students some strong foundations as well. And Sabine did some really important work, I know, in that consultation pre-placement as well. So yeah, that really underlines that point about preparation and selection. maybe, is it okay if I move on to sort of suggestions and ideas? And I don't know, they can be as wild and creative as you like. And but maybe if I start with Erin this time, have you got any, a bit of a wish list or things that you're already seeing and directions that you would like to move in terms of your social work practice in libraries?
Probably a little bit more of the meso and macro levels, but I'm just conscious that it does take time to build up rapport and relationships, and doing a bit of the service mapping, and so yeah, that does take a lot of the time, and I think that that's been helpful while I transition to this role, which is very unique to other roles that I've done, which have been more clinical settings. My previous role was working in a remote community as a social emotional wellbeing, so it was quite community development, and I was sort of I guess directed by the people in the community that I was working with. But I think that actually helped with transitioning to this role, because previously it was hospital settings where social workers don't typically always feel supported in those workplaces. Some recommendations, particularly for students, I think what Chrissy said about the preparation and maybe focusing on a project would be helpful for student placements. And there's just, I guess, I do like the creativity and the flexibility of the roles, so you can really make it your own. And depending what's sort of, I guess, coming up, there's usually different themes. So that's where the work, I guess that's where you start targeting whatever is coming up at the time, if that makes sense. So you can sort of change the role depending on what's happening at the time.
And I know Anne-Marie in particular mentioned earlier on about all that groundwork and the data collection that went into establishing a case for having social workers in the library. I imagine that's ongoing, keeping statistics on activities right. and patterns within that.
And then having more of the lived experience and their voice, and being involved in shaping the work as well. Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Anne-Marie, maybe if I could move on to you, and any suggestions or wish list from your perspective, or evidence-informed directions that you're hoping to move in at the City of Melbourne.
Yeah, thank you, Erin, for those were great comments, I think, and I think that we've been talking about this from the beginning, about being able to support people with lived experience of homelessness in the library, as part of this program. I mean, Erin and I haven't had it since the pandemic's hit. We've had a little chance to really talk about this some more, but it's still on the agenda, and we'd love to really explore that, about how we can provide roles for people in our libraries. I think the whole issue around empowering staff, one of the challenges that I didn't actually mention, and I should have, was that there is a reluctance in some staff to take on some of the issues to do with de-escalation, or when we've got people that are presenting in a sort of a challenging way, they may sort of revert to Erin to support them. Whereas what we'd like to do is, we don't want our library staff to be social workers, but we want them to certainly take on some of the skills that the social worker has in dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, because she's only one. I mean, Erin's only one person, and we're many, and we want people to feel comfortable in dealing with a range of different sort of presentations. So, and the other thing I think is really interesting, and I didn't realize there was a bunch of these people, or a few people like Maeve, who I know is in this session, or in this in this conference, in this symposium. Maeve Gamble is one of our students who's both. She's a librarian and you're a librarian first, aren't you, Maeve? And then you're studying studying social work. So I think that's a super interesting sort of area, isn't it? Where you've got those people that have decided to move from one to the other. And it was really interesting in this symposium how we started with the first presentation that talked about the other way around for us, you know, for social workers taking on librarianship qualities or librarianship sort of academic studies, where we're thinking about the other way around. So how can librarians be more like social workers, or how can library students and library academic institutions talk about those skills that those sort of people skills that in the past haven't been that well refined. That's interesting.
Yeah, I so relate to what you just said, Anne-Marie. As I said, Sabine and I had our eyes were alight in the corridor in a break saying, oh, wow, you know, just thinking about it from that different perspective. And again, thinking about information and the exchange in a different direction. And I don't know, during the presentation, when that was emphasized, the first presentation, I was sort of drawing arrows going both ways, you know, instead of it just going one way or the other way, it was that real mutuality. And I suppose that's, you know, that's when multidisciplinary teams work really well, isn't it? And it can be, well, it is a whole lot of work to get to that delicate balance where everything's intermingling and, you know, people have got their particular skill sets, but there's that beautiful crossover as well. Yeah. Lovely. And Chrissy, your suggestions, wish list, what would you add to what's already been mentioned?
Oh, I don't know if I could add a whole lot more, but we also run an outreach service with 2 agile vehicles that travel around to sites across our LGA. So we visit around 18 sites across the city. Some of them are monthly, most of them are weekly. So I see potential for some work in that area, out in our suburbs, in some of our hubs, for example, potentially being able to have a social work student ride along with our Agile Library service and assist there. So I think there's a project there. I also think there's probably a project with our home library service. As I said, we previously had a HAC nurse working with us, but I think there's potential for a deeper investigation about how there might be connections that we can make in the community for our older, and we're an aging population, so that seems an obvious place to go. Homelessness, obviously, and although I have to say, since COVID, the number of homeless people that have been using our library service has diminished. We also had a really high group of people who were had real difficulty with digital literacy. So we were often helping those people. But since COVID, again, there's been this massive leap forward where people actually had to learn to use their devices and become self-reliant. Otherwise, they weren't, you know, going to get their payments. And so they had to come forward. They had to leap forward. And I think I heard somewhere that it's something like 6 years. We jumped in digital literacy in those 2 years. So that's pretty spectacular. But I also think there's potentially, I mean, obviously there's still people in our community who aren't as digitally literate as others. So again, that's another opportunity, I think. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I think that COVID, you know, as dreadful as it all was and still is, there have been, some real shifts haven't happened there, you know, and I think sometimes out of a crisis, it does accelerate some shifts in society as well. I might just, I'm conscious of the time and I'd really love to, I can see that there's probably some questions in the Q&A there, Monique.
Yep, can you see those, Karen?
Yep, I'm just scrolling up there. So,
Yeah, we've got quite a few. You've
yeah.
prompted a lot of conversation.
Okay, so I'll just work my way down and I hope I can get through all of them. So if I read out the question and I guess a panelist can jump in. So David, thank you for your question. You have said, I'm the first full-time library social worker in the state of New Jersey. I would like to know, what are the main issues and needs you find in your work in Australia? Thanks. So who would like to respond to David's question?
I could probably answer that, and I can only speak for Melbourne because that's where I am at the moment. But so yeah, very I guess if maybe I might answer it in, and congratulations on your new role as well. So the client referrals really do vary from people experiencing not only homelessness, it's usually multiple and other compounding issues around poor mental health. It could be substance use. Often it's always trauma related, whether it's childhood or more recent, family violence. So that, yeah, I do work with a broad spectrum. So yeah, not always younger people, not teenagers, but usually it's young adults up until I think the oldest person I'm working with are in their, a few in their late 70s. So it really does, and it can be people who are at risk of losing property as well. So it's varied, the need, but there is an increasing amount of people that are experiencing poverty and really struggling with rising living costs, which they're structural issues that we can't always assist with, but we can help out with some of the day-to-day and getting I guess I see my role as a bit of a conduit or and connector.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. So I might just go to the next question because we have got a few popping in there. So from Lee Schlatter, if we have social work in libraries, does the scene risk becoming formalised and clinical? Is the patron/staff member experience becoming documented, taking away from libraries being a safe space? Is this an issue? Thank you, Lee. Good question. Who would like to respond to that?
I might be able to answer that one too, but it might be good to have one of the from a library perspective as well. But I don't, from my perspective, it doesn't feel non-clinical. You can sort of maintain confidentiality and privacy by taking people or have those private conversations and intimate conversations in a room. I guess, we can sort of, as I said, be that connector, so link people in with other support services or refer them on for further case management if that's what people need, or attend to, whether they've presented in crisis. There is case note recording, but that's through a system that it's monitored by the family and community services team.
That's a really good point. That's a good point. We don't, Erin has access to privacy databases that we don't, databases that are more private than library staff can access. But we know, I think I don't know if I've understood the question correctly, but there's plenty of library stuff that happens in libraries. There's a lot of library and there's a lot of, but what's happening now is that we're able to deal with people's whole self when they come in. So we have a lot of the people that use us are using us because it's hot outside or cold outside, or they need to use a toilet, or they need just a little quiet place to sit. But sometimes they want to use they want to find out information about, from government websites, or they want to use the public access computers, or they want to read Greek mythology. They also want to use a library, and they haven't been able to before. So because there's been barriers to that, to librarians helping them. So now I think that it's just better. It's just better when we can properly help people, or everyone that comes through the doors.
Wonderful. Look, I'll keep moving on. Again, I'm conscious of the time and the amount of questions that have popped in. So from Farasat Allah, any thoughts related to adult digital literacy versus digital citizenry support in public libraries, and what's happening for immigrant and non-immigrant ageing communities?
I can speak to that. We were the first regional area to offer a program called Tech Savvy Communities. And essentially it is digital literacy in the language of the people attending. So finding tutors who can, speak the language of the people who are coming is a challenge. And obviously we are restricted around that. But that's another opportunity for a student, because we've run 9 languages so far this year, and there are a range of different digital skills that are taught in those classes. But I think that would be a way that a social work student could connect further with the migrant community, a different entry point for a student, because obviously that's a teaching role, or a tutoring role. But yeah, I think for us, that's the way that we did it, and there's funding available out there for anyone who's interested.
Great. I think we're going to run out of time, but I think there's probably time for one more question. We'll try and get to more, but we'll try to get to Oscar's question. So what do you see as the role for social workers in urban versus rural/regional libraries? And how would social work in these different library settings differ? What would the different challenges be?
I can speak to that. I have recently been reading a lot of literature about social work in libraries, as many of you have been involved. So what I found first of all, in the literature, there's a huge gap about the challenges of regional libraries or rural libraries. So in terms of unique challenges that regional rural libraries experience as compared to metropolitan libraries is the extreme, another layer of shortage of staff and retention of staff. And also rural communities are far off, especially in Australia, they're quite spread out. The means of transportation for connecting libraries and the communities are limited, unless that we have seen recent innovative means that just Chrissy mentioned, having mobile libraries that can go out, do outreach in the areas which are not accessible, and also serving the needs of the aging population or population experiencing disabilities, or even women having young children who have limited capacity. So that adds another complex layer in regional locations where we have limited transportation facilities where people can't connect. And also when we talk about people, new migrants or refugees, that adds another layer because they are new to the country, first of all, and going in the regional locations, they have limited network from their own country or from their own language, and there are limited translators, interpreters available. We don't have bilingual staff as much as we see in more metropolitan areas. So yes, while we do have challenges in metropolitan locations, regional rural locations adds another complex layers to those challenges.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sabine. Look, again, time is against us, and I can see there's a whole lot of questions that we haven't been able to get to. So I'm sorry about that, but please, we'll try and cover those questions in another way, perhaps. So look, I would really like to thank all of our panelists. I And I think across the whole symposium, there's been just such enthusiastic acceptance when we ask people to participate and present and be involved. There's just been an unwavering enthusiasm. So thank you so much for sharing with us today as part of this discussion. I can see there's been a whole lot of chat as well. So, and I can kind of get a sense of some of the things that have been popping up as we've been speaking as well, some exchanges of resources and ideas and things. So thank you so much to Anne-Marie, to Chrissy, to Erin and to Sabine. I'm sure this has sparked a whole lot of, I don't know, fabulous ideas and new directions and collaborations. So thank you once again. Now we will move straight into the next presentation.